We are so thrilled to have Debbie McRae back because she was unable to attend the second session in December, but she's back. She's healthy, and here we are. So, and or was it no? It was the first week of
January.
the first week of January. Oh my gosh, I forgot. Yeah, it's the 21st of January already. Okay, take a deep breath. We're okay. We're already flying through 2022. So, Debbie, what do you have for us today?
You know what? Since I just went through a crisis myself, it reminded me of those early days when I was experiencing my own betrayal. And also, we have been focusing in the groups that I'm leading, the healing groups, about just figuring out when I'm in crisis, especially in those early days of the betrayal trauma, or whether I am having a reoccurrence. Maybe I'm triggered back into a crisis, which does happen often throughout the healing process. Or even if I'm working, maybe trying to work closely with my partner and we're just hitting roadblocks. It just seems like this comes up again and again and again, wherever you turn. So I just want to lay a little bit of groundwork, and then I'm going to move into, I want to give you lots of ideas today on what to do in the moment, how to establish safety in the early stages, those early crisis moments, and then just lots of awareness that I want you to have so that you're constantly aware of what's going on internally with me and why this is happening and what do I do about it. So I want to just remind everybody that when we have betrayal trauma, there is that profound sense of disconnection with our partner, and automatically it becomes very traumatic. And so for the betrayed partner, oftentimes it's not necessarily the sexual acting out that's hard, it's really that betrayal of the relationship trust. It's that disconnection that happens, and it's just such, I call it a rupture. Oftentimes it just feels like my whole world has fallen apart. I've shared this before. In my experience, I felt like a bomb just blew up in my life and it was shattered into a million pieces. And I didn't even know where to start. I know I needed to start picking up those pieces and try to figure out how to put my life back together. But it just seemed so overwhelming. But in the moment, I was actually in a crisis, which makes it impossible at that moment to actually start to put your life together, because we've got to create some safety, some stability, some support. So we're going to talk about that. Oftentimes when I do have that moment where I'm going into crisis, that experience has led me there, we have symptoms that are very characteristic of PTSD. And like I mentioned just a second ago, we need to remember that this can come up again and again. I can go into little mini crises, and it may not be with my partner. It could even just be in everyday life, because this betrayal trauma doesn't just affect my relationship with my partner. It affects my family and, all of the relationships I have there and all the chores and the duties and responsibilities I have in that realm. It affects just so many areas and aspects of our lives. So oftentimes we find ourselves going into different behaviors. So I just mentioned that there's a lot of characteristics of PTSD. So one of the things I find my clients and the women in my groups reporting is that they might have a lot of emotional instability. And that could be anything from one minute I'm feeling happy and I want to connect with my partner, to the next my mood has shifted and I'm angry, I'm irritable. It might be that I overreact over the top emotionally. It could be I'm tearful. It could be that I even go into rage. And we have spent quite a bit of time in my groups even talking about the anger. And yes, anger is good. And how do we sit in it? And how do we learn from it? Rather than how do I let it go over the top and it goes into rage, creating further disconnection. The other thing is you find the safety seeking or the hypervigilant behaviors. And so oftentimes partners might be checking bills like credit card statements. They might be going through phone bills. They might be looking through browser histories. They might be looking in their mind for continued evidence of infidelity or acting out. So that's common. Oftentimes I'll find that my partners will kind of throw themselves into crisis even in the moment as they think about the potential of future betrayals. They may even be thinking about the past, what they've heard. And so that will also take them back into a crisis. Oftentimes you are going to be experiencing in that crisis time anxiety, depression. You might start to question your own self-esteem, your own value. You might be very easily triggered by your betraying partner. And so you might be really, really watchful and very hypervigilant about checking everything they do. So if you walk into a room and they've closed a computer really quick, or they take a phone into the bathroom, or they come home 5 minutes late, oftentimes even that can throw you into that crisis state. Sleep is also another thing that's affected. So oftentimes partners will say, I have a difficult time going to sleep. I'm having difficult dreams. I'm having nightmares. And I even have some that say, all I want to do is sleep. It's really hard for me to wake up and to get going. Another thing that happens, and I remember this specifically in my own betrayal, is I had such a difficult time focusing on the day-to-day aspects of my life. It took everything I had to get up and to take care of my children and get them to school and just to do the simple tasks that I was so used to doing. Oftentimes when we're in crisis, we shut down and we might want to avoid talking about our betrayal, approaching our betraying partner, and having any kind of discussion regarding what you're going through in the moment. You might find yourself isolating, the shutting down I mentioned. And sometimes we even learn to kind of disconnect or escape from that moment. We might spend a lot of time on social media. We might get into eating. We might get into even some of our own addictive patterns of behavior. For instance, maybe getting online and shopping and spending money. So I want you to be aware that that can happen. And sometimes it hits us, it really blindsides us. So I want you to think of the first 9 to 12 months as that crisis stage. And at this time, there's some certain things that, as I am working with clients, we want to establish. And the first one is safety. So when I first see a client in my office, I'm going to just check in with her and say, okay, where are you at? What's going on? And I'm wanting to point out to her that we want to get you to a place where you're feeling safer. So that really involves something we've been focusing on in our groups, and that is establishing an optimal window of tolerance. Because once I go into crisis, my brain, because it's wired with a negative bias, now it's sensing danger all over the place because that's its job. However, if I'm in my window of tolerance, that means I can tolerate stress, I can tolerate just everyday stressors, but now I'm in a crisis, so my window of tolerance is so narrow. And what do I mean by window of tolerance? I mean that when I'm in an optimal window of tolerance, I'm actually functioning out of that front part of my brain, the prefrontal cortex, where we have that executive functioning. So I'm feeling grounded, and in that part of my brain, I can have emotional stability and empathy, emotional regulation. But when I'm in crisis, that goes away and it narrows. So now my brain has to go into that fight, flight, or freeze response. And that's going to happen time and time again. So oftentimes the first session with a client, I will just ask them, okay, what is it that we need to do to help you feel safe? And I will have them identify 2 to 3 areas where they are feeling like the betrayal trauma is really impacting their safety. And then we work on trying to figure out, okay, what can we do in the here and now? What simple steps can you take to start to feel safe again? And oftentimes that includes seeking support. I think support is one of the most effective ways to create emotional stability. A lot of times the women who come into my groups, they haven't told anybody about their betrayal trauma. And for the first time, they're in with a group of women who get it, who understand. And to see the emotional regulation that comes with that, to get that support, to get that understanding in a really safe environment. I also encourage those of you that are experiencing betrayal trauma, if you don't have a therapist who is specialized in this area, that's really important. And ideally, if your betraying partner, the addict partner, has a therapist that is also likewise trained, you have the opportunity to set it up so that they could work together and help the two of you in that healing journey together. And I really like that. That is something that Family Strategies, where I work, we have it set up that way so that we can actually do that. And I find it is so helpful And it almost kind of speeds the process along a little bit when you have therapists that are working together. Besides groups, besides therapists, I also think finding those trusted um, friends, family members, those that step out of judgment and have empathy and who can support you. And that's just ideal as well. But it doesn't often, sometimes that's not ideal and you can't have that happen. So just the more you can reach out. I know in the early days of my betrayal trauma, I didn't tell anybody because we have a tendency to isolate. And it wasn't until I finally got the courage up to tell just one friend. And the response I got, she was just so supportive and so helpful. And I ended up identifying my different friends who could support me in different ways. And so I have the friend who kind of had the more logical brain that I could sit and just talk through and ask for advice. I had the friend that was there when I was sad and I could feel comfortable, in crying and having her support. And she could give me a big hug and that would emotionally regulate me. So I ended up finding my individual, tribe who was there to help me in my healing. So connection is so important early on. Self-care is the next thing, because oftentimes when we are in crisis and even at times when our betrayal trauma comes up, the one thing that goes by the wayside is self-care. And I'm going to be very vulnerable here and tell you that that's probably why I got sick. And that was, I was so busy tending to everybody else's needs that I realized, I wasn't taking care of myself. So I really want to stress the importance of self-care, those daily practices of self-care. And in a moment, I'm going to talk about 4 areas where in the moment we can take care of ourselves when crisis comes up or we're having maybe a trauma response. So little acts of self-care. Be aware of what you are doing, because oftentimes we'll get into behaviors that are a little less healthy, I like to call them. And so we don't want to do those behaviors that are going to contribute to the crisis you're already in. So for instance, some of my clients, because they have so much anxiety, in that crisis period, they might turn to alcohol or substances to help soothe the anxiety. And so oftentimes that's kind of the first areas where I work with my clients to help them create the stability and the safety. So just be very aware of that. I've told my clients that sometimes when we're in crisis or we're having a trauma response, that we may not be able in the moment to figure out what to do for ourselves. So put together your little step-by-step list that you tuck away in a safe spot where you know it's at, and start going down your bullet point items so that you can step into some of the care that you need in the moment to create stabilization. So what do we do on a day-to-day basis when all of a sudden we find ourselves outside our window of tolerance? So we never know when that's going to happen, oftentimes in the early parts of your healing recovery as a betrayed partner. You may see something, the addict may do something, and often without warning, you are just hit. And before you know it, you're suddenly in that fight, flight, or freeze. And on many occasions, you won't even know what triggered it. You'll just find yourself in the middle of what feels like this merry-go-round of insanity once again. So I wanted to go through and I want to talk about what can we do when this comes up. And I think this is applicable to everybody, not just those in the crisis phase, but all of us that are working on our healing. The first one, I want to talk about physical, and this really has to do about taking care of your physical body and your physical health. So I tell my clients that if you find yourself kind of going back into crisis or into those trauma responses, those PTSD type responses that you're experiencing, to get up and move your body. I love that. I love that repetitive motion. I remember in the early days of my betrayal trauma, I would go out and I would walk and I would count the steps, and I'd maybe do 25 steps and I'd start over again, right? And then pretty soon as I'm walking, I would focus on my feet hitting the ground and how they hit the ground. And I would notice the air and how it felt on my skin. I would smell the air. I really worked on getting back into my body by moving my physical body. I'll tell my clients to do the cross-body tapping. That's another great thing to do, to kind of just start to feel your body and bring yourself back in. It's so regulating. I just love that rhythm that's about the rhythm of a heartbeat, because we are wired to recognize that, because as we're gestating inside our mothers, we're hearing the heartbeat, and it's a very soothing sound. So oftentimes my clients find that relaxing. I love the butterfly hug. I think that feels good too, to feel the warmth of your hands on your heart. Going out and biking, that's another great one, because we're doing, again, that repetitive bilateral movement, which really does help to regulate. Sometimes we just need to take a break. If things are really bad, we might just need to go outside and sit in the sun and feel the sun on our skin, or we might need to stop and just take a nap. We might need to watch something that's inspirational. A lot of my clients love watching inspiring talks, whether it's a TED talk, they'll even go to podcasts, so there's lots of great podcasts out there, including those from Seeking Integrity and Sex and Relationship Healing. So they're out there, and for many of my clients, they find those very regulating. Breathing is also wonderful. There are so many different types of breathing, and I'm not going to get into all the details on those, but you can go to YouTube, you can Google it and find all sorts of breathing techniques to help regulate, right, your system when you're in that hyper aroused state, or even a hypo aroused state, whether you're up really high in anxiety and anger, or you're down low and shut down. I love timeouts. I will encourage my clients to put yourself in timeout. So if all of a sudden you're having a response like that, and you're trying to deal with children and whatever's happening in the moment, just to maybe tell everybody that you're putting yourself in timeout and go someplace where you can just sit and regulate. Of course, exercising is always good. Sometimes in the early days, it's hard to do that. But even if it's just walking around the block once, anything like that to help get your body moving. And again, like I said, I really love outside. I tell my clients that are in hypoarousal that if you can just go outside and sit in the sun on the grass and do that for 10, 15 minutes, you will feel so much better. And most of them tell me that they can do something like that. So anyway, think about your physical body. What does my physical body need in this moment? I also like to look to the category of personal. What can I do for myself? Maybe it's addressing my own feelings, my own growth, what's meaningful to me. So I love healthy distractions. So this week in group, we talked about what are your favorite healthy distractions. And I loved what some of them said. Some of them have playlists of music that they know that if they go to their playlist and listen to it, that it regulates them immediately. Some of them listen to books on audio. One of the group members said she learned that baking was a healthy distraction. And the reason it's so regulating is because I have to read a recipe and I have to use the front part of my brain to measure it out and to read the directions and put it together. And she said what it's also done is, as she's done baking, it's kind of pulled her children in to help her. And it's created for them really great rituals. So as even the family is going through a crisis in her situation, she's also teaching the kids to regulate as they bake together. I just loved that idea. Of course, a lot of them said they have their favorite shows that they like to go to. So they go to a streaming service and maybe they're watching The Office, they're watching Seinfeld, or one of them said New Girl. They have found that just having something that makes them laugh is a healthy distraction. So make a list of healthy distractions so that you can turn to those. Thought stopping is another thing that you need to do. Remember that when I am in crisis, I'm in my betrayal, I am going to go into some real negative thinking. So I have got to get myself out of, I call it, sometimes we loop. I get into a loop and it's the same thing over and over again. So what can you do? You can journal. I tell my clients, get it out of your body, get it on paper, and just set the intention that as I write it on this paper, I no longer need to think about it. It's there. I can go back to it if I ever need to. And then we're going to work on maybe other ways that we can kind of shift thinking. Sometimes I'll tell my clients, if it's really bad, just tap the sides of your head and go, stop it, stop it, stop it. Not going to go there. That's not completely true, because we know that the brain loves to create stories. And I was reading a research article once that said the interesting thing about stories is our brain takes bits and pieces of information and it connects the dots, even though it doesn't know all of the information to create a story. And believe it or not, when we create stories and we go into our negative stories, that our brain releases dopamine, and we think we're feeling better in the moment, but we're actually releasing chemicals in our brain similar to in that same area where the addict also gets the dopamine hit. And I thought that was so interesting. So we need to consciously be aware of our thoughts. I love self-compassion messages. I work in my groups and with my clients. Come up with your self-compassion message. So whatever it is, maybe you feel like that day that you've just blown it and that you've tried so hard to do all of your recovery, or maybe you got irritable with your children, or maybe you know, yelled at your betraying partner. Just stop and go to that wonderful self-compassion message. I always love to combine it with, the cross-body tapping or with the butterfly hug. And just a simple statement, reminding yourself that you're doing the best you know how to do, that you're healing, and that we all make mistakes in healing, and that's part of learning. And that's enough. It can be very, very simple. You can give yourself permission to stop what you're doing. Sometimes I tell my clients, say it out loud. If you hear it and you tell yourself to do it, I think it's a lot better than just thinking it. So that's just my personal take on it. We've already talked about having a good laugh, getting out and playing. I think play is so important. I've assigned some of my clients to even go to a playground and swing, and to go do something fun. Take your children, get to the playground and go do something in the moment, or get a hobby, find something that you like to do or something that's easy to do. Those types of things, again, it's another healthy distraction. And then constantly be aware of the Halts acronym. Many of you have heard that. So it's hungry, angry, or anxious, lonely, tired, or stressed. And then you might even come up with your own ideas on what to do. So if I'm hungry, what am I going to go eat? If I'm angry or anxious, how am I going to manage that? And so just to move through that acronym and figure out what works for you. That's one of the things I'm really stressing in our group right now is figure out what works for you. And even if that's all you do, it doesn't have to be complicated. For example, when I was going through a lot of stress a couple of weeks ago, I really found that music and listening with my AirPods or my earpods was very, very soothing to me. It brought my anxiety down. I also teach my clients Eft tapping, which is a tapping technique that works very well. And that worked for me to bring my anxiety down. I also found that some of my trauma breathing would help me kind of calm my system down, because my brain kept wanting to take me outside of my window of tolerance in that moment. So find what works for you and use it again and again and again if you need to. Relationally is the next category. So these are the things that you need to do to build stable and secure connections with your loved ones and others. So oftentimes we're in crisis and we are having a trauma response, there is a disruption in connection. So if we can turn to our partner that's betrayed us and they're in recovery, they might know how to handle, but oftentimes they don't. And they're trying to learn how to do it as well. They're trying to figure out how to support you and themselves as they're working their recovery. So you may need to phone somebody or text a friend, let them know how you're feeling. You might need to go spend some time with someone. I know for me, I've got my friends that I'll go to lunch with if I'm really stressed out, and just spending time with them and laughing and sharing with them what I'm going through and having them give me ideas will just reset me and I feel like I'm new again. Again, reach out to support. I really encourage the women in my groups. They are very cohesive. They text each other. They'll go out to lunch together. They'll stay after group and chat down in the parking lot together. So all of those types of support people, have them on alert, have them in a group text, and send out if you're struggling and ask them for help on what you might do if you can't think about it in the moment. Another idea that we teach, and I love this, is if you know that you're going to have to go in and maybe have a very difficult situation with maybe your betraying partner, we're going to talk about bookending something. So it's called a bookend potential activator. So remember, I get activated, my system does. I may go into a crisis, I may go into a trauma response because I'm in that activated state, meaning I'm outside my window of tolerance. So what you can do is arrange to speak with a friend about what you're about to experience and how you're going to handle it. And then go through that experience. Maybe it's a difficult conversation, with your betraying partner. And then after you have that conversation, you're going to call your friend again. You're going to bookend it and report on how it went. Kind of analyze it with them. There's something very grounding about having that accountability, having that support before you go into it, having that support once you're finished. The next area I'm going to talk about, and it's the last area, and that is spiritual. For some people, that's connecting to God or to the universe. For others, it's how do I feed my spirit, maybe my higher self. So think about it in those terms. Of course, I love meditating. I love calming the mind. For those that are in crisis or having a trauma response, sometimes just plain music and breathing won't do it. So have your favorite app where maybe they talk you through some guided meditation or they talk you through the breathing techniques. That is very, very effective. Again, there's different types of meditations that you can do. So when you're in that place where you're in that optimal part of your window of tolerance, go and kind of pick out and put a playlist together. I love that idea. Reading, sometimes just reading or listening to something will help you in the moment. That's very inspirational. I love to listen to books about people who have had interesting lives, where maybe they've overcome their own obstacles and then they've gone on to be very resilient and maybe take what they've been through and they have then moved forward to help other people. So to me, that's very inspiring. Or maybe it's just one of those healthy distraction types of books that you like. Maybe it's, a fiction novel that's got some, history mixed in. That's one of the things I like to listen to as well. Sometimes when we're in crisis, we're having a trauma response, it's hard to read. That's what I find. So sometimes it's easier to listen in the moment. And remember, anytime we engage our five senses, right, whether it's through smell, where it's through my, hearing, my sight, my touch, my taste, it helps to ground us. So that's another thing to put on your list. Of course, I love journaling. We've already talked about journaling. I find that journaling is very therapeutic. So even between sessions with your therapist, journaling is a really great way to process. Oftentimes, my clients will go get a special journal that will become their healing journal. They'll bring it into session. They'll bring it into group. They will journal in it, and it almost becomes, and I even have some clients, they'll do artwork in it. And it just kind of becomes, I think, evidence of the fact that they're starting to heal and they get better as they look back on it. So I love that. Of course, gratitude is wonderful. We've talked about the gratitude practice of 3 good things that have happened to me that we journal every night before you go to bed. But also if you're in crisis or having a trauma response, if you can sit down and start journaling, maybe 10 things you're grateful for, it's a really great way to get yourself grounded once again. And then sometimes we just have to turn it over. This is also another spiritual practice. And for everybody, it looks different. For some people, it's turning it over to a higher power and letting them take control and be in charge of everything. For others, it's maybe the process of letting go. And maybe you've got some rituals on how you let it go. We all have our own specific way of doing that. But sometimes just surrendering it in that moment is all you can do. And another way I even do it with my clients is I use the container exercise, and sometimes we just contain it for the moment. We imagine we're putting it into a beautiful container and we're putting the lid on it and we're going to go put it somewhere safe and let it stay there. For many of my clients, I have them leave it in my office so that they can then come back the next week and address it, and they don't have to keep thinking about it. I also take them through a guided imagery exercise where I have them imagine that they're in crisis, something comes up, they're having a trauma response, and we visualize them driving back to my office and walking into my office. They have permission to go to their container in my office, and they add to it and they leave it there and they go back home. So there's lots of great ways we can do. And I hope that I've helped you just come up with at least one or two ideas that you can try. Maybe you're already doing it, but I think that it would have been so helpful for me in the early days of my, crisis from my betrayal, if I would have just had some ideas on what to do. And so hopefully that's helpful. If anybody's got any questions on that or anything else, I'd be happy to help.
So if you have questions at the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, please type them in there. But when you were talking about the post-traumatic stress, and I think for partners it's chronic post-traumatic stress, and there's physical, like people have physical challenges, like physical manifestations is what I was trying to come up with and wasn't coming up with, but they really can, they can have so many different ways that it comes out, particularly when it's that just chronic. When you're talking about the emotional instability and overreacting, and I thought, like part of it, your brain knows that your reaction to this circumstance is way over the top, but it's so layered. It's like it's poking against something else, or you just don't have the bandwidth. I think that I was thinking when you're talking about like this, your particular health, I thought, well, you shoot, it's like at Christmas time, and everybody's overdoing, trying to get too much done. For myself this year, I was much better at making a list and prioritizing. And there was stuff at the bottom that it was like, if this doesn't get done, it just doesn't matter. And I had to make it like just not matter, because otherwise it's like, I need to get to this all done and I need to get it, and like then I'm, but I also don't have the bandwidth, when I'm highly anxious about completing all these tasks and trying to, do. So just helping for me to go, what do I really need to do today? And even having some flexibility in that, because you just never know what's going to, pop up or who's going to call. So when you're talking about, like when the safety seeking and looking for evidence, and I think it's really partners are looking to not find stuff. It's not like they're hoping to find it. They're hoping to not find it, but it's safety seeking to go look for it. So, I mean, it makes, complete sense. The difficulty sleeping, I thought, and it's both, like I can't possibly get out of bed, or I can't sleep, or I wake up in the middle of the night, or whatever. And it's so challenging. But one of the things you talked about later was the breathing exercises. And I can wake up at 2:00 in the morning and having the racing thoughts, and the 4-7-8 breathing exercise has helped me go right back to sleep, and so learning what actually works for me, may not work for somebody else, but works for me. When you were talking about having challenges just doing the day-to-day life, I think especially when you're in a crisis, it's you give yourself some grace and go, again, these are the priorities. Like you have to feed the children, but like, does the, mountain of laundry need to be done today? No, maybe a load. Like giving yourself some grace, getting some help, going, so somebody else can come in and help. Having the trusted friends, I love that you had kind of the tribe of people, and you knew this one was going to, give me the hug, and this one's going to say, okay, here's what we're going to do, or this one's going to go out to lunch with me. I mean, identifying that, because I think it's hard to find, it's hard to find who's going to be safe. And I think it's also betrayed partners struggle with, they take on the shame and perceive that they can't tell people. And so just, just going like, I'm really struggling, and, I just need a little support with, whatever. I think, I think that there are ways to do it incrementally where it'll give you some support, but you don't have to tell the whole stuff. So I love that you reminded people groups and a qualified therapist. It really makes a difference, getting the right help, to guide. Nobody got the manual on this stuff. Nobody, so having somebody that can help you, I say all the time, not everybody's married that, struggles with this, but, for the people that are married, when you said I do, you didn't know you were saying I do to all of this. And so, just understanding that, you need other people to guide you. That's really what recovery communities are about too, is, peer support and guidance and learning to live differently. But getting that support is so critical to to healing and changing. I love that you call it a healing journal. I love that it's not just journaling, it's my healing journal. I'm owning my healing for me. And I'm cautious about using recovery for partners. I think you're recovering from deep wounds, but I don't ever want to make it sound like you are part of the problem or, all that type of thing. So, but the healing journal and the container, I think that is brilliant, and that you give people permission to come back to your office, add to the container, and hopefully if they're struggling, if that whatever comes up while they're home or whatever, they go, oh wait, no, that container is, at your office, and I'll check in with it, next week when I see you, but I don't have to, to think about it, at least in this moment. So and the book ending, addicts, we talk about that for addicts as well as, as partners, but, having, it's the same thing. It's a container. You're giving permission for this amount of time. I've done that when you're talking about funny movies too. I was like, I had something in it and it was a real thing, but me going into self-pity is a really bad choice. And I gave myself, I think 1 hour. I was like, you can feel sorry for yourself for 1 hour. And then I went and put on, a funny movie, from the 1970s that just always makes me laugh, and it works. And then I was fine, but I gave myself the permission for 1 hour to, oh yeah, I feel bad for me, and I needed that.
Yeah.
Bookended though, with that. So, and there was one other thing I was thinking about, and I'll have to, I don't know. I can't remember. It doesn't matter. But the going outside. Yeah. Running for me, hiking for me, walking for me is really good, and being intentional about what I'm seeing. Like you said, you're paying attention to your breath, you're paying attention to the breeze, you're paying attention to the sunshine, whatever. I also find if I'm, in fact, I'm barefoot right now, but I find that if it's Friday, so I was like, I need to be grounded. And if I feel my feet on the ground and I pay attention to that, that is a grounding, technique for me as well. So, but I do start my day with, I've got a couple of apps with meditations on it, and that's how I start my day. And I can go back to them, and I do sometimes. I go, just checking in with that might be a good choice, just to, to settle in, but all of these things, all of these techniques are great resources, and they're just jumping off places, because anything you go, oh, that not so much, but if I do this, great. It's finding what works for you to just help you in the moment, be able to be more present. Oh, bake therapy. I call it bake therapy. That was the other thing. It's like my whole family knows, like, I need to do bake therapy. Like, I'll be going, what do you want me to bake? What do you want me to bake? And they're going, like, they'll pick something because they know that, I'll be calmer once I bake, and they'll have something. I don't cook, but I do bake. I do. So
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was a lot of great stuff. I hope that everyone that joined us live, found some things that resonate. Oh, the hungry, angry, lonely, tired, anxious too, and stressed. Like, I already know if I wake up tired, like I didn't get a good night's sleep, that my bandwidth is going to be a little less. And so I have to be more intentional about watching the other ones. And I need to eat, because if I'm hungry and tired, the more of the halts that I have in deficit, the more challenging it will be, to keep, on a serene path. So, but we would love questions in the Q&A. Feel free to post any questions that you have about these topics or anything else. I mean, this is great in this specific thing. Feel free to share if you've come up with some things that you've used specifically. We'd love to hear those as well. So,
I just want to come back around to something you talked about, and that is, I really like the idea of when we are in a crisis and we're dealing with betrayal trauma, we have to get to a point where we do recognize that it's kind of like we've had an injury in a way. Just like if I were to break my leg, I'm not going to be able to accomplish nearly what I did prior to me breaking my leg. And so, in a way, we've got a broken heart. We've even got maybe a broken brain to some degree because of the trauma. We've even got a broken body, like you said.
Mhm.
And so, if somebody had a physical injury like a broken leg, we would have a lot of, compassion and give them a lot of grace. And I think that's an important concept for us to remember for ourselves. I oftentimes have clients come in and say, how long is this going to go on? And they might be 6 months into it. And while there's really not a definite time limit because everybody's healing is different, it might take, a few years. And I know that's very overwhelming. But along the way, what we look at it from a resiliency standpoint, they are learning so much as they're doing their healing that isn't just applicable to them and their betraying partner. It can be used in every aspect of their lives. And time again, women come in and they'll say to me, oh my gosh, I use this or I use this that they have learned in our groups, they've learned in individual therapy. And I'm using it with this. And I'm, with my teenage daughter or with my extended family, I'm setting boundaries. I'm so much
Mhm.
better at this. Can't believe I didn't know how to do this before. And so they start to recognize that this healing journey isn't just only for that I'm trying to repair this ruptured or this disconnected relationship, because that is the goal. That is the goal of this healing journey, but I'm also using it in other aspects of my life. And as a person, I'm becoming more and more resilient. I've often said, I don't ever want to go through betrayal trauma again, but what I've learned and where I'm at today, oh my gosh, I would never go back to how I used to be. I'm so grateful for what I learned because it really did make me a different person in so many ways. I feel like, a lot more, healthier and, a lot more boundary, a lot less shame, a lot more grace I give myself. So there's also some, there's some extra side benefits, I guess I should say, to this healing journey. The other thing I wanted to mention too was that when I have women come into my office and they are struggling with their healing, oftentimes I go back to the basics. Okay, what are you doing for self-care in those 4 areas? What are you doing for yourself physically, personally, emotionally, relationally? What are you doing? And I'm telling you that the majority of the time I find out that they are out of balance. They're not doing their self-care. They're not doing their routines and their rituals. And so remember, if you're not doing that, then your window of tolerance is narrow. So when you're trying to move towards your partner, I'm trying to establish connection, you're not going to have the bandwidth that you normally would if you were doing that. So I know I feel like a broken record, but oftentimes, I always go back to, okay, what are you doing? What are the basics? Who are you reaching out to? Who are you connecting with? What's the self-care? And so I just can't, stress that enough that if you're in a place right now where you're feeling really bad, you've got to turn to self-care. That to me is the number one step. Reaching out for support, self-care, those 2 things.
Well,
So
and I think it's like one of those things, you talked about your tribe and like having a friend you walk with, and you just do it. Like, it's like, we do it at this time and you're not thinking about it or like, oh, the weather's not nice. I don't feel like, you just do it, like I have friends like that, we meet at the gym at, on these days, whatever, or we go for a hike. I've got different friends, that do different things. And that's great because then we just go, it's planned and I don't have to think about, it's 5:30. I don't feel like doing this at the end of the day. And, I can make up all the excuses in the planet for why I don't really need to do that. But if I do that, we all have smartphones. So like having an alarm go off that goes, oh, it's, time to do whatever, it's time for your meditation. It's time for what, I mean, taking those, like, I've got alerts that remind me of healthy things for me to do, because otherwise I get all caught up in the whatevers, so it, if I schedule it and I prioritize me taking care of me, that's the other key to this is like, I have to prioritize that over, because I'm really bad about that, where I'll skip my 12-step meeting because, the phone rings and I want to help somebody else. All fine. But, at the end of the day, it's still, I should prioritize my 12-step you can't give away what you don't have. And so if I get completely depleted, that will do no one any good. So, I think, I think when you're talking about halts too, it's like, have a plan, because when I get too hungry, my blood sugar drops, nothing sounds good. So I have like 3 things that I know I will like, even if they don't sound good in the moment, but so having a plan, it's like, okay, I'm too, stressed out. What do I need to do? But knowing what I'm going to do, so it isn't, I'm relying on this part of my brain, which isn't connected right now. Like you said, have the paper, have the paper ready to pull out. I was thinking, have that paper and pull it out, daily or weekly or something like that, so that you can kind of go, where am I on this? Do I need to make a course correction now, rather than waiting till, the train has left the station?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. I think we do need to have those options that we can move into that are healthier. Since we don't have any questions, I'm going to just do a really quick teaching moment, if that's
Please.
okay.
Yes.
And one of the things, I use an acronym in my group to I want my clients to be very aware what's going on, because part of our healing journey, I think, requires that I've got to be so attuned to what's going on internally for me. And most of us have learned not to really tune into what's going on internally. And especially when we run the risk of going into like having a crisis moment or a trauma response. And so I use the acronym TEMPO, TEMPO. So this way, it kind of gives them a format on to identify what's happening in the moment and what can I do about it. So T stands for trigger, and I'll go back and talk about that in just a second. E stands for emotion. M, as in mom, stands for meaning. I also call it the stories I go into. P is the position I take, whether I'm going to go into a secure, connected attachment or an insecure, meaning I'm either going to go into anxious or avoidant. Okay. And O is the options that I have. So your list would be the options part of it. So how I describe this is, we have triggers throughout, this healing journey. And oftentimes we're not even realizing we're triggered until all of a sudden we feel something in our body. And our emotions in our body, actually, we feel physiologically. So when I'm angry, I feel it, like, for me, it just kind of like is a rush up into my head, and my head gets hot. It's like an adrenaline rush. When I'm sad, right, it's like a real heaviness in my heart. Or if I'm worried, it's like my stomach, I almost get nauseous. So I start to teach my clients, what do emotions feel like in your body, so you can recognize that you've had a trigger. Because in that moment, you've had this triggering event, and like that, you put a meaning and place a meaning on it, which creates the emotion in your body. So, for example, my husband comes home 5 minutes late, right? And when he walks in, I'm already got stories going on in my head. I'm putting meaning on it, like, what was he doing? He's up to no good. He was supposed to be here at 6, and at 6:05, I can never trust him. This is never going to get better. And it's so instantaneous that now I am angry. If I'm going to then move into, and I look at the position I'm going to take, there's a couple things I could do. One of them is I can react, meaning I am now outside my window of tolerance, and I'm going to go automatically into a reactionary behavior, which is going to create disconnection. And so I might yell, I might say, what's wrong with you? I can never trust you. And now I've started an argument. That's one of my options. If I choose to move into, or we don't at that point, it's so reactionary, there's no choice. We just automatically go into some of the less healthy behaviors. However, I can also recognize, if I know this is going on and I've identified it, hey, I'm back in my stories, I don't know this is true, and I'm going to choose to move into a secure attachment style. Then I'm going to stop and take a breath. I'm going to recognize the stories I'm in, and I'm going to take a little pause in there, and I'm going to choose to respond. So responding really does take slowing it down, identifying, am I going to create connection with this or disconnection with this? And then what are my options for creating a secure attachment? It might be, taking a breath, realizing I don't know all the facts yet. I need to check in. But right, because I'm in the middle of dinner and he's just walked in, I will ask once dinner's over with. Maybe we can do a check-in and I can go to him and request, hey, can I just visit with you and share with you? I got triggered earlier and I just want to share it with you. I'm trying to kind of just get some more information. Whatever it is, come up with the words you want to use, whatever works for you, and then choose to respond in a way that creates connection. And so I can literally take situations that my clients go through with their partners and we can kind of break it down, because the goal in all of this is to create that connection. And oftentimes, because I can go outside my window of tolerance really quick, I may need to have number one as my option, that I don't address anything with my partner until I'm really grounded. We talked about, the limbic system a little bit ago. You were making some comments, Tammy. And oftentimes, when we're limbic, we don't remember what we've said. We don't have full awareness of the words we've said. We may hear our partner say things and we only hear every, few words, and we put it together. And so we have to be very careful about trying to have difficult conversations when we are outside our window of tolerance and we're in fight and flight. I just find that that's where, things kind of go south. So be aware of that. Always choose that if I'm going to address something difficult, that I have to ground myself, and then know how you ground yourself. So anyway, that is one way that I kind of help teach my clients that, hey, we have a choice in this, right? And we can choose to either just go into our automatic reactions, and which is what our limbic brain wants us to do, or we can widen our window of tolerance before we address it. And then in the end, we're going to create secure attachment. So anyway, I hope that's helpful.
That's super helpful. Yeah. And when you're talking about the limbic, it's like, it's not just if I'm in my limbic, I've been in conversation, like I had this immediate, like I was in a conversation with somebody and clearly that person was in their limbic, because they completely, like I wasn't, and I was really clear, laying out details and stuff like that, completely misunderstood everything I said and took things that, and it just devolved. And, like we were trying to resolve something, so it didn't work. So, in that I'm going like, for me, I should have said, I think we like taking a time out for both of us, and let's, so because I really want to repair, and we did eventually, but it took a lot. It was a lot harder, didn't have to be. I was thinking, when you were working with partners, how challenging is it? Because I, as an addict, it was horribly difficult for me to feel emotions and understand. So do partners struggle with that as well, of like, where do you feel, anger or sadness and all that? Do they struggle with the body connection to their, to their feeling of emotions?
Right. I find that those that are in more of a hypoarousal state have a more difficult time, feeling emotion. So I have to tell you, when I work with women in group and they kind of have hypoarousal, I actually, as a therapist, like it when they come in and they're in hyperarousal, because then they're now in a state where they can start to identify, I'm really sad about this. I'm really angry about this. And so they're starting at that point, I can kind of get them to tune into, where do you feel it in your body? Because I'm such a believer in the mind-body connection, and we've got to know what's going on.
Can you discern hypo and hyper arousal?
Yes.
I mean, share a little bit, because
Yes.
people may not be familiar with those terms.
So when I'm outside my window of tolerance and I'm going, my brain is, remember, instead of it's connected to here to prefrontal, right? It's going to go to the mid-back part of my brain. And so that's called the limbic system. So my body, one of the defenses it goes into is it's going to heighten. It's going to become excited. So I'm going to go into a fight or flight response, which is, we're back in that survival part of our brain. And so there, my body's going to get amped up. My body's releasing all these chemicals, that are getting me revved up, because I might need to fight or I might need to run. And so we respond that, or we react that way rather. And so that's the hyper aroused state. So I might have anxiety. I might get angry, right? I might want to leave a conversation and get away as fast as I can. So that's typically how hyperarousal, and there's various, forms of that. The hypoarousal state is, it's like a shutdown. Our body can only stay here in hyperarousal for so long. And as a result, my body kind of gets exhausted. I can no longer, my adrenals can't, secrete, cortisol, and, I've used up all the serotonin in my brain, and, my epinephrine and everything else that's exhausted. And so we go into a shutdown. So that's more of a freeze state. So with that, my partners, I will see them, they want to withdraw, they disconnect, they might numb out through some different activities. They don't want to do things. They might want to sleep all the time. And so with that, we've got to get them kind of back up into that optimal window of tolerance. So again, when I find a client is struggling, oftentimes it's because they're outside their window of tolerance. So is that helpful?
Yeah, yes, that's very helpful. But I know we use these terms sometimes, and I thought,
Thank you.
not everybody's gonna understand exactly what those are. I found for me, and you talked about the spiritual aspects as well. For me, I would say the Serenity prayer as a mantra. And like I would be repeating it over and over again, and it would calm me down. I for a lot of reasons, but it gave me the recognition of what do I have control over, not anything outside of myself, but it gave me the ability to slow things down. And it still does. I still use this, and to slow things down and recognize that I can have a choice. I can react or I can act. I can take information in and then shift it and act. And my life goes better if I'm acting instead of reacting. I'm less likely to have to go through and make a whole bunch of amends. I'm less likely to disrupt, relationships that I value. So getting those few seconds to have the ability to get this part of my brain back online, is really valuable to me. So, but I mean, that's one technique, but I think it's, whatever you find for you, but like, I would say the Serenity prayer over and over again and say, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, which is everyone, everyone's behavior. I go into the long list, that driver, whatever was ranting in the moment, and what, the wisdom to know the difference, I can change me, I can have the ability to shift my attitude. What is it I'm looking for? And like you said, if we're looking for healthy connections, then doing things for me that will help me connect in a healthy way, I win too. It isn't, when you were talking about, what position do I want to take, I can be right, or I can be connected to people, I'm right, or I can go, I'm curious, like what you're saying, tell me more about that so that I can connect in a different way, it really ends up, and not everybody, I'm early on, your betraying partner that's lying and cheating and all that. But unfortunately, that lens of like, no one is safe, gets put on everyone. And there are people, but we're all human. We're all going to fall short, so, giving ourselves grace, giving some grace where needed to other people, I want to be in healthy connection.
Yes. I love that. It's a great way to end.
Yes. And we're at time. So I'm glad you're healthy. Thank you all for joining us. The video will be on this site on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. Probably, I don't know if it'll go yet this afternoon. We'll see what Scott's doing. And we've got all kinds of work groups starting again, including Out of the Doghouse, Sex Addiction, Porn Addiction 101, level ones are starting again on the Seeking Integrity site. So, and as always, email me if you've got suggestions for Debbie's. Email me. I'm happy to share it with her. Tammy, TAMI at seekingintegrity.com. So we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.
For 2 weeks. See you then.
Yeah, 2 weeks. Yeah.
Okay, bye.
Bye.